The morning sun caught the rifle's finish like fresh snow, drawing every eye in the compound as Corporal Raina Kashani stepped out of the transport vehicle. The weapon slung across her back gleamed white against her standard-issue combat fatigues, an impossibility in a world where every other firearm wore the muted blacks and earth tones of tactical practicality. Whispers rippled through the assembled marksmen before she'd taken 3 steps toward the registration building. A cluster of shooters near the equipment staging area didn't bother lowering their voices. "That's got to be a joke," one of them said, his tone carrying the particular confidence of someone who'd never been wrong about anything in his life. "She probably thinks it matches her manicure." Raina kept her eyes forward, her boots crunching on the gravel with measured steps. The International Precision Rifle Competition drew the best military and civilian marksmen from 43 countries, and she'd earned her slot through the same qualification process as everyone else here. The white finish on her custom rifle wasn't a fashion statement. It wasn't about making a statement at all, though no one had bothered to ask. Before we go further into what happens next, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've seen people succeed with unconventional approaches where you're from, or maybe you know what it's like when everyone doubts your methods before you've even had a chance to prove yourself. The registration building smelled like gun oil and strong coffee. Behind the desk, a sergeant with a Croatian flag patch glanced at her paperwork, then at the rifle case she'd set carefully on the floor. His eyebrows rose slightly. "That's an interesting choice of finish," he said, his English accented but clear. "Very visible." "It serves its purpose," Raina replied, her voice carrying the flat neutrality of someone who'd had this conversation before and knew it wouldn't be the last time. The sergeant stamped her forms and handed her a range assignment card and competitor badge. "Lane 47 for 0 confirmation. Qualifiers start at 1400 hours. He paused, his expression shifting to something that might have been concern or curiosity. "Good luck out there." The range stretched across 2 kilometers of varied terrain, with positions set at intervals from 300 to 2800 meters. Raina found lane 47 between 2 shooters who'd already set up their equipment. The man on her left had a setup that probably cost more than a new car, all black carbon fiber and digital ballistic computers. The woman on her right wore German army fatigues and had the efficient movements of someone who'd done this thousands of times. Both of them noticed the white rifle immediately. The man actually stopped adjusting his scope to stare. "Is that thing painted?" he asked, not quite managing to keep the judgment out of his voice. "Custom Cerakote finish," Raina said, laying out her equipment with practiced efficiency. "Thermal dispersing properties for extended firing sessions." The man snorted. "Right, because that's definitely why someone chooses white." He turned back to his setup, shaking his head. "Instagram generation," he muttered, just loud enough to be heard. The German woman said nothing, but her slight smile suggested she found the whole situation amusing. Raina had seen that smile before, too. The look that said she was being dismissed before anyone had seen her shoot, categorized as someone trying to make a splash rather than someone who'd come to compete. Raina assembled her rifle with movements that came from muscle memory older than conscious thought. The white chassis wasn't standard issue from any manufacturer. She designed the specifications herself, worked with a custom shop in Nevada for 8 months to get every detail exactly right. The colors served multiple purposes, none of them decorative, but she'd learned years ago that explaining herself to skeptics was a waste of breath. Her shooting would speak for itself, or it wouldn't. Either way, she'd sleep fine tonight. The range master's voice crackled over the loudspeaker system. "All competitors for afternoon qualifiers, you have 30 minutes to zero your rifles. Use targets at your assigned distances. This is not scored. Mark your dope and prepare for official qualification at 1400 hours." Around her, the mechanical sounds of bolts cycling and magazines seating filled the air. Raina loaded 3 rounds into her magazine, settled into position behind her rifle, and found her breathing rhythm. The white stock felt like an extension of her own skeleton, familiar as her own heartbeat. Through the scope, the world narrowed to wind flags and mirage, to the small orange square 600 meters downrange that represented her zero target. Behind her, she heard boots on gravel and knew, without looking, that people were gathering to watch the girl with the white rifle. Let them watch, she thought. Let them wait. The first shot would tell them nothing. Neither would the second. But if they had the patience to stay, if they watched long enough, they might start to understand that some things that looked wrong from the outside made perfect sense once you understood what you were looking at. She pressed the trigger, and the rifle spoke with a voice like controlled thunder. The zero shots grouped tight, 3 rounds within a 2-inch circle at 600 meters. Reyna made minor adjustments to her scope's turrets, logged the numbers in her data book, and cleared her rifle. Around her, other competitors were doing the same, the morning session winding down before the official qualifiers began. She just stood up from her shooting mat when a shadow fell across her equipment. Staff Sergeant Marcos Del Vecchio stood with his arms crossed, his Italian shooting team jacket unzipped to show at least a dozen competition medals pinned to his shirt. He was looking at her rifle the way someone might look at a broken appliance. "I've been shooting competitively for 17 years, he said without preamble. Military and civilian circuits. Never once saw anyone bring a white rifle to a serious competition." Reyna began packing her equipment into her case, each item finding its designated slot. "There's a first time for everything," she said. Del Vecchio crouched down, getting eye level with the rifle before she could close the case. "The finish is going to show every scratch, every bit of carbon fouling. You'll spend half your time cleaning it just to keep it looking pretty." He stood back up, shaking his head. "This is a precision shooting competition, not a photo shoot." 2 other shooters had drifted over, drawn by the conversation. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a U.S. Marine Corps cap, laughed outright. "Maybe she thinks the white makes it shoot straighter. Like racing stripes on a car." The second man, older with a weather-beaten face and a Norwegian flag patch, was more diplomatic but no less dismissive. "In my country, we have a saying. The hunter who decorates his rifle has forgotten what the rifle is for." He offered Reyna an apologetic shrug, as if he regretted having to deliver this wisdom but felt it was necessary. Reyna clicked the latches on her case shut and looked up at the 3 men. The Cerakote finish reduces heat signature and provides superior thermal management during sustained fire. The specific formulation includes ceramic particles that dissipate barrel heat more efficiently than standard black finishes. At extreme distances in variable light conditions, the reduced mirage from the barrel can mean the difference between a hit and a miss. She lifted the case, its weight distributed perfectly by the custom handle she designed. "But you're right, it does look distinctive." Del Vecchio's expression flickered between irritation and uncertainty. "That's a lot of technical talk for what looks like a cosmetic choice. Where do you even get the idea for something like that?" "My father," Reyna said simply, and walked toward the competitors' tent area before any of them could respond. The afternoon brought the first official qualifier, a relatively straightforward test at 800 meters. Shooters would fire 5 rounds at standard IPSC targets, scored for accuracy and time. Reyna drew a late position in the rotation, which meant sitting in the competitors' area watching others shoot while the sun climbed higher and the wind began its afternoon dance across the range. The German woman from the lane next to hers shot clean, 5 hits in tight grouping. The man with the expensive carbon fiber setup shot clean as well. They made a show of meticulously cleaning his rifle while discussing his hand load specifications with anyone who would listen. Del Vecchio shot clean, naturally, and received applause from a small crowd of spectators who'd apparently adopted him as their favorite. When Reyna's name crackled over the loudspeaker, she walked to the firing line with her white rifle and immediately heard someone in the spectator area say, "Oh, this should be interesting." The tone suggested they expected entertainment rather than marksmanship. She settled into position, the familiar ritual of stock weld and breathing and letting her heartbeat slow to something that could fit between trigger presses. The wind was quartering from the left at approximately 7 miles per hour, with gusts that pushed it closer to 10. She made her elevation and windage adjustments, loaded her magazine, and waited for the rangemaster's signal. The targets went live. 5 steel plates, 800 meters downrange, each one requiring a hit to count. Reina's first shot rang the leftmost plate with a sound like a bell. The second plate fell 3 seconds later. The third and fourth went down in smooth succession, her bolt manipulation practiced to the point of automation. The fifth shot, compensating for a wind gust she felt across her face just before pressing the trigger, struck center mass. Clean. 5 for 5. Exactly what was expected at this level of competition. Nothing exceptional, nothing that would make anyone reconsider their opinions about white rifles or the women who carried them. As she cleared her rifle and stood, Reina caught Del Vecchio watching her from the competitor's tent. He wasn't smiling anymore, but he wasn't impressed either. His expression said what his words didn't need to, that any competent shooter could manage 800 meters in good conditions, and that one clean qualifier proved nothing except that she'd managed to meet the minimum standard for being here. The Marine who'd made the Racing Stripes comment was talking to another American shooter, loud enough to carry. White rifle shot clean. Guess we'll see if it works when the distances get real. Reina packed her equipment and checked the schedule board. Tomorrow would bring the second qualifier at 1,200 meters, with wind and mirage complications. The day after, 1,500 meters with time pressure. Then 1,800, then beyond. The distances would grow, the conditions would worsen, and the field would thin as shooters were eliminated or eliminated themselves through accumulated misses. That evening in the competitor's dining hall, she sat alone at a corner table with her data book and a plate of food she barely tasted. She was reviewing wind charts and temperature fluctuations, making notes about tomorrow's expected conditions, when a tray settled onto the table across from her. The Norwegian shooter from that morning sat down uninvited. He was older than she'd initially thought, maybe 60, with pale blue eyes that had spent decades squinting through scopes. "Henrik Strand," he said, offering his hand across the table. "I owe you an apology for this morning." Reina shook his hand, surprised. "You don't owe me anything." Strand cut into his chicken with deliberate precision. "I made an assumption based on appearance rather than performance. That's the kind of thinking that makes old shooters obsolete." He glanced at her data book, at the meticulous notes and calculations covering every page. "You're 0 session this morning. I was 3 lanes down. Watched you shoot. Your form is exceptional. Economy of movement. No wasted motion." "Thank you," Reina said, uncertain where this was going. Strand took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. "Your father taught you that form. And the rifle design. The white finish." Reina's hand tightened slightly on her pen. "He did. Is he here? Watching you compete?" "No," Reina said quietly. "He died 4 years ago. Training accident. But yes, everything I know about precision shooting came from him, including why this rifle looks the way it does." Strand nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd suspected. "Then I will watch your shooting tomorrow with different eyes. And I will tell you now what I should have said this morning. Welcome to the competition. May the best shooter win." He finished his meal in comfortable silence, then stood and offered her one more nod before walking away. Reina sat alone again, her data book open, her father's voice a memory that felt more solid than the chair beneath her. Tomorrow the real test would begin, and the white rifle would speak louder than any explanation she could offer. The 1,200-meter qualifier began under conditions that separated competent shooters from exceptional ones. By 9 in the morning, the temperature had already climbed to 32 degrees Celsius, and heat waves shimmered off the desert floor between the firing line and the distant targets. The mirage made reading wind nearly impossible through a scope, turning what should have been clear sight pictures into dancing, distorted images that required experience and intuition to interpret correctly. Reina drew an early shooting position, which meant facing the worst of the morning heat before the wind picked up enough to clear some of the mirage. She watched the flags downrange, noting how they hung limp near the firing line, but showed movement at 600 meters and beyond. The wind was there, just not where most shooters would think to look for it. Staff Sergeant Del Vecchio shot before her, and she watched his process with clinical attention. He took his time, using a digital weather station to gather atmospheric data, consulting a ballistic calculator on his phone, making precise adjustments to his scope. His first shot struck low and right. The second hit. The third missed left. He finished with 3 hits out of 5, a respectable score under difficult conditions, but not the clean performance he'd managed yesterday. When he came off the line, his face was flushed from more than just heat. "The Mirage is brutal," he announced to the gathered competitors, as if this absolved him of the misses. "Anyone who shoots clean in these conditions is either lucky or lying." Raina's name came across the loudspeaker. She walked to the firing line, carrying the white rifle, and heard someone behind her say, "Wonder if her pretty gun can handle real distance." The comment drew scattered laughter. She settled into position and immediately felt the difference. The white Cerakote finish her father had designed stayed noticeably cooler than the black rifle she'd seen other competitors handling. Her barrel, which would heat significantly over 5 shots, would generate less mirage rising from the metal itself. It wasn't a huge advantage, but at this distance, in these conditions, small advantages accumulated into hits or misses. Through her scope, the target wavered and danced. Raina ignored the mirage near the target and focused instead on the wind indicators at mid-range, where the flags actually moved. She calculated her hold-off, settled her breathing, and pressed the trigger. The white rifle recoiled smoothly against her shoulder. 1,200 meters downrange, steel rang. Her second shot struck high, a victim of the wind gust she'd felt but hadn't fully compensated for. She made the adjustment, smaller than most shooters would think necessary, and sent the third round. Hit. The fourth shot required reading a condition change she sensed through the scope as the mirage pattern shifted. Hit. The fifth shot, taken with the sun now fully bearing down and sweat running into her eyes, completed the sequence. Hit. 4 out of 5. She dropped 1 shot to wind, but under conditions that had humbled shooters with decades more experience, it was a solid performance. More importantly, it moved her up in the standings. As she cleared her rifle and stood, she noticed Henrik Strand watching from the competitor's area. He caught her eye and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Del Vecchio was watching too, but his expression had changed from dismissive to calculating. He was reassessing, running numbers, trying to figure out if her performance was luck or skill. The Marine from yesterday, whose name tag read Campbell, approached her as she packed her equipment. "Not bad shooting," he said, and for a moment she thought he might actually offer genuine respect. Then he continued, "Of course, 1,200 still a manageable distance. Wait until we get past 2,000. That's where the real shooters separate from the weekend warriors." Raina closed her rifle case. "I'll keep that in mind." Campbell gestured at her rifle case with his chin. "You do all that custom work yourself?" The white finished the modifications. "My father and I designed it together," she said. "He was a competitive shooter before he went military. Taught me everything about long-range precision." Was Campbell noted. Past tense. "He retired?" Raina felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever this subject arose. "He died 4 years ago. But yes, he taught me everything first." Campbell's expression shifted, becoming slightly uncomfortable. He clearly hadn't expected that answer and didn't know quite how to respond. "Sorry for your loss," he said, the words automatic and hollow. He gestured vaguely toward the range. "Well, good shooting today. See you at the next qualifier." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her alone with her equipment and the memory of her father's voice explaining why white ceramic coating dissipated heat better than any other finish they tested. She could still see him in their garage workshop, running thermal imaging tests on different colored rifle barrels, documenting temperature differentials with scientific precision. The white finish hadn't been about aesthetics or making a statement. It had been about physics and performance, about finding every possible advantage when margins were measured in fractions of an inch at impossible distances. That afternoon, Raina found a quiet corner of the range to practice. Not official shooting, just dry fire exercises and position work, refining the small things that would matter when distances stretched past 2,000 meters. She was working on her breathing rhythm when she noticed a woman watching her from about 20 feet away. The woman wore civilian clothes, but had the bearing of someone with military training. She was perhaps 40, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and a camera with a serious lens hanging from her neck. After a moment, she approached. "Kara Tehrani," she said. "I'm covering the competition for Precision Rifle magazine. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Raina stood, brushing dust off her pants. "About what?" Tehrani gestured at the rifle case beside Raina. "About that white rifle everyone's talking about. You're getting attention, you know. Not all of it positive." "I've noticed," Raina said dryly. "So why white?" Tehrani pulled out a small notebook. "Everyone I've talked to says it's impractical. That's a cosmetic choice. But you shot 4 out of 5 this morning in conditions that dropped experienced shooters to 2 or 3 hits. That's not luck." Raina considered how much to explain, how much technical detail would translate into print. "The white ceramic coating provides superior thermal management," she said finally. "In sustained fire or high heat conditions, it keeps the barrel cooler. Cooler barrel means less mirage distortion rising from the gun itself. At extreme distances, that matters." Tehrani wrote quickly. "And this was your father's design? We developed it together. He was always looking for fractional advantages, ways to find performance improvements that other shooters weren't considering." Tehrani looked up from her notebook. "He's not here watching you compete?" "No," Raina said. "He's not." Something in her tone must have communicated finality, because Tehrani didn't press. Instead, she asked, "What's your goal here? Are you trying to prove something?" Raina looked out across the range, at the heat shimmer and the distant targets and the mountains beyond. "I'm trying to shoot the best I possibly can. If that proves something to other people, fine. If it doesn't, that's fine too. The rifle does what it's designed to do. That's all that matters." Tehrani smiled slightly. "Mind if I follow your performance through the rest of the competition? I think it might be a good story here." "Shoot what you want," Raina said. "Just don't expect me to be dramatic about it. I'm here to compete, not to be a story." Tehrani nodded and walked away, already reviewing her notes. Raina returned to her practice, but she could feel the weight of attention settling on her shoulders. The white rifle had made her visible in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. Tomorrow would bring 1,500 meters, and the field would thin further. Some shooters would rise, others would fall away, and everyone would be watching to see which category the woman with the white rifle fell into. The competitors' dining hall that evening buzzed with conversations about the day's shooting and speculation about tomorrow's 1,500-meter qualifier. Raina entered with her meal tray and immediately noticed the shift in atmosphere. Conversations didn't stop when she walked by, but voices lowered. Eyes tracked her movement toward an empty table in the corner. She'd become a curiosity, something to be observed and discussed. She sat down and opened her data book, reviewing her wind calls from the morning session and making notes about conditions she expected tomorrow. The routine kept her focused, kept her from thinking about the attention or the weight of her father's absence. For years gone, and sometimes it still felt like you might walk through the door and ask to see her data from the day's shooting. A tray clattered onto the table across from her. Then another. Then 2 more. Raina looked up to find Del Vecchio and 3 other shooters settling in uninvited. Campbell the Marine was there, along with a French Army sergeant named Beaumont and a civilian shooter from Texas who'd introduced himself at registration as Tucker Wade. Del Vecchio leaned back in his chair with studied casualness. "We've been talking," he said, "about your rifle, about your shooting, and we're trying to figure something out." Raina closed her data book. "What's that?" "Whether you're legitimate or if there's something else going on," Del Vecchio said. 4 out of 5 at 1,200 in brutal conditions is impressive, but it's also convenient. Right when people are starting to talk about the white rifle, suddenly you shoot well. Raina kept her expression neutral. "I qualified for this competition through the same process as everyone else here. My scores are documented." Campbell leaned forward. "We're not saying you can't shoot. We're saying that rifle of yours, all that custom work, it makes us wonder if maybe there's some kind of advantage built in that isn't exactly regulation." Like what Raina asked, a hidden laser rangefinder? A ballistic computer sewn into the stock? Tucker Wade, the Texan, had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Look, nobody's accusing you of cheating. We're just saying that when someone shows up with equipment that looks that different and then performs well, it raises questions. Beaumont, who'd been silent until now, spoke in heavily accented English. In France, we have inspections of equipment. Everything must be standard, must be measured. Perhaps your rifle should be examined by officials. To remove all doubt. Raina felt anger rising, but kept it contained. You're welcome to request an equipment inspection. The competition rules allow for it. Any official can examine my rifle at any time. They'll find a custom Cerakote finish, a modified stock design, and a barrel from a reputable manufacturer. Nothing illegal. Nothing that gives me an advantage beyond what any of you could achieve with the same modifications. Del Vecchio smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. So defensive. We're just having a conversation. You're questioning my integrity, Raina said flatly. There's a difference between conversation and accusation. Campbell shrugged. If you've got nothing to hide, then an inspection shouldn't bother you. It doesn't bother me, Raina said. Request one. I'll wait while officials take my rifle apart and measure every component. And when they find nothing wrong, when they confirm everything is legal and within specifications, I'll expect an apology. From all of you. The four men exchanged glances. Del Vecchio's smile faded. We'll see what tomorrow brings, he said, standing up. 1,500 meters is where things get interesting. That's where we'll really see what that white rifle can do. They left as abruptly as they'd arrived, carrying their trays to another table where Raina could see them resuming their conversation with frequent glances in her direction. She sat alone again, her appetite gone, staring at her half-eaten meal and feeling the familiar isolation that came with being different in a field that valued conformity. Henrik Strand appeared beside her table like a ghost. She hadn't heard him approach. May I? He asked, gesturing at the now empty chairs. Raina nodded. Strand sat down slowly, his movements careful. I heard some of that conversation, he said. Not all, but enough. They are wrong to question you this way. They're worried, Raina said. I'm an unknown variable. The rifle looks wrong to them, so I must be wrong somehow. Strand shook his head. No, they're worried because you are good, because you shot well today when some of them did not, because you have something they do not understand, and that frightens small minds. He paused, studying her face. Your father, he taught you to expect this? This doubt from other shooters? Raina thought back to her teenage years, to competitions where she'd been the only woman, the youngest competitor, the one with the unusual equipment. He taught me that my shooting would speak for itself, that if I focused on performance and ignored noise, eventually people would have to accept the results. Wise man, Strand said, but also perhaps optimistic. Some people will never accept results that challenge their assumptions. They would rather believe in cheating or luck than admit someone found a better way. So what do I do? Raina asked. Submit to an equipment inspection to prove I'm legitimate? Strand smiled. You do what your father taught you. You shoot. You let the rifle speak. And you remember that their doubt is not your burden to carry. He stood up, preparing to leave. Tomorrow is 1,500 meters. I will be watching. Not because I doubt you, but because I wish to learn. There's a difference. After he left, Raina sat alone for a long time, the dining hall gradually emptying as competitors returned to their quarters or equipment areas. She thought about her father's workshop, about the months they'd spent testing different finishes and configurations, about his meticulous documentation and scientific approach. He'd never cared what something looked like if it performed better. Function over form, always. The white finish worked. The data proved it. That was all that mattered to him. Finally, she gathered her belongings and headed back to her quarters. Tomorrow would bring longer distance and more pressure. The field would thin further. Some of the doubters would eliminate themselves through missed shots and accumulated failures. Others would shoot well and continue questioning her. Either way, she'd be there with a white rifle, shooting the way her father taught her, proving nothing except what could be proven through triggers pressed and steel wrung downrange. In her room, she laid out her equipment for the morning, checking and rechecking every component. The rifle gleamed white under the fluorescent lights, impossible to ignore, impossible to misunderstand as anything other than exactly what it was. A tool built for precision. a design refined through testing and data. A legacy carried forward by someone who refused to let doubt stop her from competing at the highest level. She set her alarm and turned off the lights. Tomorrow, 1,500 meters would reveal who belonged in this competition and who'd reached their limit. The white rifle would speak its truth, and whoever wanted to listen would hear it. The others could keep talking. Dawn brought clouds, unexpected and unwelcome. By the time shooters assembled for the 1,500-meter qualifier, a marine layer had rolled in from the west, creating conditions that would test every skill they possessed. The clouds filtered the sunlight into flat, shadowless illumination that made reading mirage nearly impossible. The wind, no longer predictable in its morning calm, gusted erratically from multiple directions. The range master stood before the assembled competitors with a weathered face that suggested he'd seen every possible condition a shooter could face. Today's qualifier is mandatory, he announced. 5 shots at 1,500 meters. Time limit of 10 minutes from first to last shot. Targets are standard IPSC steel. Wind is variable. Mirage is minimal due to cloud cover. This will test your wind reading ability more than any previous stage. Good luck. Raina drew a middle position in the shooting order, which meant watching others struggle first. The shooter ahead of her, a decorated Canadian Army sniper, managed only 2 hits out of 5. His frustration was visible as he cleared his rifle, shaking his head at the wind flags that seemed to contradict themselves every 30 seconds. Del Vecchio shot before her as well. She watched him set up with his usual meticulous precision, his digital wind meter reading conditions that change between measurement and trigger press. His first shot missed right. The second hit. The third missed left, catching a gust he hadn't anticipated. He finished with 3 out of 5, his face dark with barely contained anger as he left the firing line. Campbell approached the line next, and Raina noticed him glancing at her white rifle where it rested in its case beside her shooting mat. He settled into position, shot his string, and managed 4 out of 5. Good shooting under difficult conditions, but she could see the tension in his shoulders as he packed up. He was shooting well, but not well enough to feel secure in his position. When Raina's name echoed across the range, she walked to the line carrying the white rifle and heard whispers ripple through the spectator area. Someone had erected a small tent for observers, and she could see Cara Tirani there with her camera, along with a growing crowd of competitors who'd finished their strings and stayed to watch. She settled into position and immediately felt the difference the clouds made. Without direct sunlight, the barrel would stay cooler naturally, but the trade-off was the loss of mirage as a wind indicator. She'd have to read the flags and feel the conditions on her skin, trust her instincts in ways that pure calculation couldn't replace. Through her scope, the target was a small rectangle of steel 1,500 meters away. She watched the flags at various distances, noting how they contradicted each other. The wind near the firing line came from the left. At mid-range, it shifted more heated. At the target, the flag hung nearly limp with occasional gusts from the right. She made her initial adjustments, loaded 5 rounds, and began her breathing cycle. The first shot needed to be diagnostic, a baseline to work from. She pressed the trigger, and the white rifle spoke. 1,500 meters downrange, dirt kicked up 6 inches left of the target. The wind had been stronger than she'd calculated. She adjusted, waiting for the next condition. The flags near the target stirred, showing movement. She pressed the trigger. Steel rang clear and pure, the sound carrying back across the distance like validation. The second shot was a hit. For the third shot, she noticed something the other shooters might have missed. The clouds were moving, creating zones of slightly different air pressure and temperature. When a thicker cloud passed overhead, the wind pattern shifted subtly. She waited for the pattern she wanted, found it, and took the shot. Hit. The fourth shot required reading a condition that wasn't visible in any flag or indicator. She felt the temperature drop slightly on her face, since the pressure change that came just before the wind shifted. It was the kind of awareness her father had spent years teaching her, the ability to become part of the environment rather than fighting against it. She made her adjustment and pressed the trigger. Hit. 3 hits, 1 miss. 1 shot remaining. The 10-minute time limit meant She had perhaps 90 seconds left. She could take the shot now, bank her 3 hits, and accept the 1 miss. Or she could wait for the perfect condition, risk the time running out, and go for 4. She waited. The wind settled into a pattern she recognized, the flags aligning in a way that suggested a brief window of consistency. She pressed the trigger. The white rifle recoiled. Steel rang. 4 out of 5. Under conditions that had humbled shooters with twice her experience, she'd matched Campbell's performance and exceeded Delvecchio's. As she cleared her rifle and stood, she heard applause from the spectator tent. Not everyone was clapping, but enough people recognized good shooting when they saw it. Henrik Strand approached as she packed her equipment. Exceptional wind reading, he said quietly. That last shot, you waited for the condition rather than forcing it. Very few shooters have that patience. My father taught me that time limits are psychological, Raina said. The clock exists, but panic is a choice. Strand nodded thoughtfully. Tomorrow is 1,800 meters. Even longer distance, possibly worse conditions. The field will be cut to top 30 shooters after tomorrow. You are currently ranked 15th. Raina closed her rifle case. Then I need to shoot well tomorrow. You need to shoot as you shot today, Strand corrected. Trust your process. The results will follow. He walked away, leaving her alone to finish packing. She noticed Campbell watching her from across the range, his expression unreadable. Delvecchio was there too, talking animatedly with Beaumont and Tucker Wade, their body language suggesting they weren't discussing the weather. Cara Tirani appeared at her elbow. Mind if I get a quick comment? That was impressive shooting. Raina shouldered her rifle case. The conditions were challenging for everyone. But you managed 4 hits while most shooters got 2 or 3. How? I read the wind carefully and took my time, Raina said. Same thing any good shooter would do. Tirani glanced at her notepad. Some of the other competitors are saying your rifle's thermal properties give you an unfair advantage. That the white finish creates less heat distortion than their equipment. The finish does exactly what it's designed to do, Raina said. Manage heat more efficiently. There's nothing unfair about it. Any shooter could use the same finish if they wanted to. The specifications aren't secret. But they don't, Tirani pointed out. Which means you have an advantage they're choosing not to use. Or it means they're married to tradition and unwilling to try something different, Raina countered. Innovation isn't cheating. It's evolution. Tirani smiled. Can I quote you on that? Quote whatever you want, Raina said. I need to prep for tomorrow. She walked away before the journalist could ask more questions, heading toward the practice area where she could work through her process away from spectators and competitors who measured her every movement. Tomorrow would bring 1,800 meters and more pressure. The field would thin. The doubters would either accept her performance or double down on their skepticism. Either way, the white rifle would be there. Cool to the touch even after 5 shots. Managing heat the way physics and engineering said it should. Performing exactly as designed, exactly as her father had intended when they'd spent those months in the workshop testing and refining and documenting every detail. She found an empty practice bay and began her routine. Dry fire exercises, position work, mental rehearsal of tomorrow's potential conditions. The clouds were beginning to break up overhead, letting patches of blue sky through. Tomorrow might bring sun again, or more clouds, or something entirely different. She'd be ready for whatever came. That was the only certainty she could control. The 1,800-meter qualifier arrived with perfect weather, which somehow made everything worse. Clear skies and light winds meant no excuses, no environmental factors to blame for missed shots. Pure shooting skill would determine who advanced and who went home. The pressure settled over the range like a physical weight. Raina arrived early to check her equipment and found 2 range officials waiting at her assigned lane. The older one, a retired military officer with a clipboard, looked uncomfortable. Corporal Cassiany, we've received a formal request for equipment inspection. Several competitors have raised concerns about your rifle's compliance with competition regulations. Raina set down her rifle case without surprise. She'd been expecting this since the confrontation in the dining hall. Go ahead. Inspect whatever you need to. The younger official, A woman with careful hands and a measuring tape began a methodical examination. She removed the rifle from its case, checked the barrel length, measured the stock dimensions, examined the trigger mechanism, and documented every specification. The older official photographed each step, creating a record that would either vindicate or condemn. After 20 minutes, the female official looked up. Everything is within regulation parameters. The Cerakote finish is unusual but not prohibited. The stock modifications are well within allowable customization limits. Trigger pull weight is compliant. Barrel length is standard. She made notes on her form. I see no violations of any competition rules. The older official nodded, clearly relieved. Thank you for your cooperation, Corporal. We'll file this report with the competition director. You're cleared to compete. They left, taking their documentation with them. Reyna reassembled her rifle, checking each component with practiced efficiency. The inspection had cost her preparation time, but it had also done something more valuable. It had created an official record that her equipment was legal, cutting off that avenue of criticism permanently. Henrik Strand appeared as she finished setting up. So they inspected, and found nothing, as expected. As expected, Reyna agreed. But now it's documented. The doubters will find new reasons to doubt, Strand said. This is the nature of people who cannot accept what they do not understand. But you have removed one weapon from their arsenal. He gestured toward the distant targets. 1,800 meters today. I shot my string already. 3 out of 5. My old eyes struggle at this distance. The young shooters have advantage here. What's the scoring looking like? Reyna asked. Del Vecchio shot 5 for 5. Clean. He is in first place now. Campbell shot 4 out of 5. Also very good. The German woman, Christoph, she shot clean as well. This distance is separating the field quickly. After today, only top 30 advance to the final stages. Reyna checked the standings board visible from her lane. She was currently ranked 12th, comfortably inside the cut line, but one bad string could drop her out of contention. The margin for error had disappeared entirely. Campbell walked past her lane, deliberately slowing to look at her setup. Heard they inspected your rifle, he said. Must be nice to have that cleared up. It is, Reyna replied evenly. Course, legal doesn't necessarily mean fair, Campbell continued. You've still got equipment most of us can't access. Custom work that costs more than some people's cars. Makes you wonder if this is really a test of skill, or just a test of who can afford the best gear. Everyone here has access to quality equipment, Reyna said. You're shooting a rifle that costs at least as much as mine. The difference is choices, not resources. Campbell's expression hardened. The difference is you've got something to prove. You show up with a rifle that screams, look at me, and then you act surprised when people question it. I don't have anything to prove, Reyna said. I'm here to compete. That's all. Right, Campbell said. Just like you're carrying that rifle because of thermal properties and not because it makes you stand out in every photo and video of this competition. He walked away before she could respond, leaving her alone with the implication hanging in the air. The range master's voice crackled across the loudspeaker. Kashani, you're on deck. Prepare to shoot. Reyna pushed the conversation from her mind and focused on the task ahead. 1,800 meters was where shooters encountered the limits of their equipment and skill. Bullet drop at this distance meant significant holdover or scope adjustment. Wind drift could push a bullet several feet off target. A shooter's ability to read conditions and make accurate calculations became paramount. She approached the firing line and settled into position behind the white rifle. Through her scope, the target was a distant rectangle of steel that required perfect conditions and perfect execution to hit consistently. She watched the wind flags at various distances, building a mental model of the air currents between her position and the target. Her name was called. Time started. She had 10 minutes for 5 shots. The first shot required establishing a baseline. She made her calculations, adjusted for the wind she read, and pressed the trigger. The bullet's flight time at 1,800 meters was noticeable, a full 2 seconds between trigger press and impact. She watched through the scope, tracking the trace as the bullet flew downrange. Dirt kicked up 3 inches left of the target. Close. Very close, but a miss. She adjusted for the wind. She'd underestimated and prepared for the second shot. The flags had shifted slightly, showing more consistent conditions. She pressed the trigger. 2 seconds later, steel rang clear across the distance. Hit! The third shot came after waiting for the wind to settle into the pattern she wanted. Her patience paid off with another solid hit, the steel singing its validation. For the fourth shot, she noticed the heat mirage beginning to build as the sun climbed higher. Other shooters' barrels would be heating significantly by their fourth or fifth shot, creating additional distortion. The white Cerakote finish on her barrel was noticeably cooler to the touch, managing the heat more efficiently. She made her wind call, pressed the trigger, and watched the bullet strike home. Hit! 3 hits, 1 miss. 1 shot remaining and 6 minutes left on the clock. She could take the shot now and bank her score, or wait for optimal conditions and risk running out of time. She waited, watching the flags and feeling the air temperature on her face. The wind settled into a brief moment of consistency, the kind of condition that came and went in seconds. She recognized it, adjusted, and pressed the trigger for the 5th and final time. The steel rang. Hit! 4 out of 5. As she cleared her rifle, she heard applause from the spectator area. She'd matched Campbell's score and come within 1 shot of Delvecchio's perfect string. More importantly, she'd done it with equipment that had been officially inspected and cleared, removing any remaining questions about legality. She packed her gear and checked the standings. Her 4 hits moved her up to 9th place, while inside the cut line for advancement. Tomorrow would bring even longer distances and more complex challenges, but she'd proven she belonged in this competition at the highest level. Cara Tirani was waiting as she left the firing line. Your rifle was inspected this morning and cleared. Then you shot 4 out of 5 at 1,800 meters. How does it feel to silence some of the critics? Reyna shouldered her rifle case. The critics who matter are the ones who judge shooting, not equipment. I'm not here to silence anyone. I'm here to shoot. But you must feel some satisfaction in proving them wrong, Tirani pressed. I feel satisfaction in good shooting, Reyna said. Everything else is noise. She walked away before the journalist could ask more questions, heading toward the competitor's area, where she could review her data and prepare for tomorrow. The white rifle had spoken again, ringing steel at a distance that demanded excellence. 4 shots, 4 hits, and 1 miss that taught her something about wind reading she'd carry into the next stage. That was all that mattered. That was all that had ever mattered. The night before the 2,000-meter qualifier, Reyna couldn't sleep. She lay in her quarters, staring at the ceiling, running calculations in her head, visualizing wind patterns and bullet trajectories. 2,000 meters was where the truly exceptional separated from the merely excellent. At that distance, every variable mattered. Temperature, altitude, humidity, Coriolis effect, even the spin drift of the bullet itself became factors that could mean the difference between hit and miss. She finally gave up on sleep at 3 in the morning and went to the equipment area. The range was closed, but the covered staging zones remained open for competitors to work on their rifles. She found her assigned bay empty and quiet, illuminated by a single overhead light that cast harsh shadows. She laid out the white rifle and began a complete inspection. Not because anything was wrong, but because the ritual of checking every component grounded her, reminded her of countless nights in her father's workshop doing exactly this. He'd taught her that confidence came from preparation, that doubt crept in through gaps in knowledge or readiness. She checked every screw, every adjustment, every measurement. The rifle was perfect. A noise behind her made her turn. Delvecchio stood at the entrance to her bay, backlit by the exterior lights. For a moment, neither spoke. Couldn't sleep either, he said finally, stepping into the bay. 2,000 meters does that. Makes you think about all the ways a shot can go wrong. Reyna straightened, keeping the rifle between them. What do you want? Delvecchio pulled up a stool and sat, his posture suggesting he planned to stay a while. I want to understand, he said. Your rifle, the white finish. I've been shooting competitively for 17 years, and I've never seen anything like it. At first, I thought it was just for attention. Then I thought maybe there was some kind of a legal advantage. But the officials cleared it, and you keep shooting well. So now I'm trying to figure out what I'm missing. It's thermal management, Raina said. The white ceramic coating dissipates heat more efficiently than standard finishes. At long distances with multiple shots, that reduces mirage from the barrel itself. Del Vecchio nodded slowly. I read about thermal properties after your equipment inspection. The physics makes sense. But that's not the whole story, is it? You could achieve similar results with other colors or finishes. So why white specifically? Reina was quiet for a moment, deciding how much to share. My father was a physicist before he became a competitive shooter. When he started designing this rifle, he approached it like a scientific experiment. He tested dozens of finishes, documented temperature differentials, measured mirage patterns. White ceramic performed best in every test. The fact that it looks unusual was irrelevant to him. Function mattered. Results mattered. Del Vecchio leaned forward. But he's not here to see you shoot with it. No, Reina said. He died 4 years ago. Training accident during military exercises. This rifle was the last project we worked on together. The silence stretched between them. Del Vecchio's expression shifted, something harder in his features softening. I lost my brother 6 years ago, he said quietly. Combat deployment. He taught me to shoot when we were kids. Every time I compete, I'm carrying him with me, trying to honor what he taught me. Reina hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to find common ground with someone who'd been her most vocal critic. We both shoot for ghosts then. Maybe, Del Vecchio said. Or maybe we shoot because they taught us something worth carrying forward. He stood up, preparing to leave. Tomorrow's going to be brutal. 2,000 meters in whatever conditions the desert decides to throw at us. I'm going to shoot the best I can. I hope you do the same. I will, Reina said. And Cassiany, Del Vecchio added, turning back at the entrance. That equipment inspection I requested. I'm sorry for that. It was petty. Your rifle is legal, and your shooting is legitimate. I was looking for excuses instead of accepting that you're just better at reading conditions than I gave you credit for. He left before she could respond, his footsteps fading into the pre-dawn darkness. Reina stood alone in the bay with a white rifle, feeling something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. They were all here carrying something, all competing with ghosts and legacies and the weight of people who'd taught them to shoot. She finished her inspection and returned to her quarters. Sleep came easier after that, her mind finally quiet enough to rest. Dawn broke clear and cold, the desert air crisp with the promise of challenging conditions. By the time shooters assembled at the 2,000-meter range, wind flags were already dancing with inconsistent gusts that would make accurate shooting nearly impossible. The range master stood before the top 30 competitors who'd survived the cuts. This is your final qualifier before the championship stage, he announced. 5 shots at 2,000 meters. Time limit of 15 minutes. Only the top 15 shooters advance to tomorrow's final competition. Wind is variable and building. This will test everything you've learned. Reina drew a late shooting position, which meant watching others first. She saw shooters she respected struggle with the distance and conditions. The German woman Christoph managed 3 hits, solid shooting, but not exceptional. Henrik Strand, shooting before his body told him he was too old for this, managed 2 hits and shook his head with rueful acceptance of his limitations. Campbell shot and got 3 hits, frustration evident in every movement as he packed his gear. Del Vecchio approached the line when his name was called. Reina watched his setup process, noting the care he took with his calculations. His first shot hit. The second missed. The third hit. The fourth missed in a gust that appeared from nowhere. His final shot struck true. 3 out of 5. Good shooting that would likely advance him, but not the dominant performance he'd hoped for. When Reina's name echoed across the range, she walked to the firing line with a white rifle and felt dozens of eyes tracking her movement. The competition had evolved beyond skepticism about her equipment. Now people watched because she'd proven she could shoot, and they wanted to see how she'd handle the most difficult distance yet. She settled into position and read the conditions. The wind was chaotic, gusting from multiple directions with no consistent pattern. The flags contradicted each other. The mirage boiled in the heat. This was the kind of shooting that separated instinct from calculation, where feeling the conditions mattered as much as measuring them. She loaded 5 rounds and began her breathing cycle. Her first shot needed to establish the baseline in this chaos. She made her best calculation, adjusted for what she felt as much as what she measured, and pressed the trigger. 3 seconds later, dirt kicked up just right at the target. Close, but a miss. The second shot came after watching the flags settle briefly into something approaching consistency. She adjusted from her first shot's impact and pressed the trigger. Stilrang. Hit. For the third shot, she waited longer than seemed reasonable, letting time tick away while she searched for the conditions she needed. When it came, she recognized it instantly and took the shot. Hit. The fourth shot required reading a wind shift she sensed more than saw. The temperature on her face changed. The pressure shifted. She made her adjustment and fired. Hit. 3 hits, 1 miss, 1 shot remaining. 7 minutes left on the clock. The wind had, if anything, become more chaotic, the flag showing no consistent pattern. She could take the shot now, accept 3 hits as a solid score, or wait for conditions that might never come. She waited. Seconds ticked past. 1 minute. 2 minutes. The flags continued their chaotic dance. Then for just a moment they aligned. Not perfectly, but close enough. She pressed the trigger for the final time. 2,000 meters away, after a flight time that felt eternal, steel rang pure and clear. 4 out of 5. The championship stage brought 15 shooters and a distance that pushed beyond normal competition parameters. 2,500 meters, nearly a mile and a half. At this range, bullets dropped over 200 feet from bore line to target, traveled for nearly 4 seconds through constantly shifting air, and required calculations that bordered on meteorological prediction. The range master assembled the finalists in a briefing tent the night before the final competition. Tomorrow represents the pinnacle of precision rifle shooting, he said, his voice carrying the gravity of someone who understood the significance. 2,500 meters is not a distance most military snipers will ever attempt in actual operations. This is pure sport, pure challenge. U-15 represent the best shooters from around the world. Tomorrow, one of you will prove you are the best of the best. He outlined the format. Each shooter would fire 5 rounds. Scoring would be cumulative from all previous stages plus tomorrow's performance. Ties would be broken by the tightest group size at 2,500 meters. Weather forecasts suggested moderate winds with possible gusts. Temperature would climb throughout the day. After the briefing, competitors gathered in small clusters, discussing strategy and equipment. Reina stood apart, reviewing her data book under a portable light, when Henrik Strand approached with Del Vecchio beside him. "We've been talking," Strand said, "about tomorrow, about the distance and what it will require." Del Vecchio looked uncomfortable but determined. "I wanted to say something before we shoot. Your performance through this competition has been exceptional. 4 out of 5 at 2,000 meters in those conditions was some of the best wind reading I've seen. You earned your spot in this final, and anyone who says otherwise is lying to themselves." Reina looked up from her data book, surprised by the directness. "Thank you. I'm going to shoot my best tomorrow," Del Vecchio continued. "And I hope you shoot yours. May the best shooter win." He extended his hand. Reina shook it, feeling the firmness of genuine respect. "May the best shooter win." Strand smiled. "This is how competition should be. Respect between warriors. Tomorrow we battle, but tonight we acknowledge each other's skill." He gestured toward the distant range, barely visible in the darkness. 2,500 meters will humble us all, but some of us will be humbled less than others. The three of them stood together for a moment. An unlikely alliance formed through shared understanding of what tomorrow would demand. Then they separated to their quarters, each carrying the weight of preparation and expectation. Reina spent the evening performing final equipment checks and reviewing 4 years of data her father had compiled about extreme long-range shooting. She found his notes about wind reading beyond 2,000 meters, his observations about how bullet performance changed in thin air at extended distances, his calculations for compensating factors most shooters never considered. His handwriting filled the pages, precise and methodical. In the margins, he'd written observations that went beyond pure data. Trust your instincts when calculation fails. Wind is a conversation, not a command. Patience is accuracy at distance. She traced the words with her finger, feeling the connection across time and death. Morning arrived with the kind of clarity that made long-distance shooting possible, but not easy. The sky was an infinite blue, cloudless and unforgiving. Wind flags along the 2,500-meter range showed movement, but not the chaotic gusting of previous days. Difficult conditions, but manageable for shooters who understood what they were seeing. The 15 finalists assembled at the firing line. News crews had arrived overnight, along with spectators and officials from various shooting organizations. What had started as a standard international competition had become something more, a showcase of the absolute limits of precision rifle shooting. The shooting order was determined by reverse ranking. Reina, sitting in 4th place overall, would shoot 11th. She watched the early shooters with clinical attention, noting their win calls, their group sizes, their successes and failures. The first shooter managed 1 hit out of 5. The second got 2 hits, both barely catching the edge of the steel. The third shooter, a Russian army sniper with decades of experience, managed 3 hits with a group size that drew appreciative murmurs from the crowd. Campbell shot 8th and struggled. 1 hit out of 5, the distance and wind overwhelming his usually solid technique. He left the line shaking his head, clearly frustrated with his performance. Christoph, the German shooter, approached the line for her attempt. She shot with mechanical precision, her form textbook perfect. 2 hits out of 5, with the misses close enough to suggest small errors in wind reading rather than fundamental mistakes. Del Vecchio shot 10th. Reina watched his entire string, studying his wind calls and timing. His first shot missed left. The second hit. The third hit. The fourth missed, right in a gust. The fifth shot, taken after a long wait for conditions, struck true. 3 out of 5, with a respectable group size on his hits. Then Reina's name was called. She walked to the firing line, carrying the white rifle, and the crowd noise dropped to near silence. Everyone wanted to see what the woman with the unusual rifle could do at this impossible distance. She settled into position and looked through her scope at the target 2,500 meters away, a small rectangle of steel that seemed impossibly far. The wind flags told a complex story. Light conditions near the firing line, moderate wind at mid-range, stronger gusts near the target. The air temperature was climbing, creating mirage that would build throughout her string. She had 15 minutes from first to last shot, and she intended to use every second if necessary. She loaded 5 rounds and began her breathing cycle. The first shot at this distance was always partially diagnostic, establishing the baseline from which all other adjustments would flow. She made her calculations, factored in everything her father had taught her about extreme distance shooting, and pressed the trigger. 4 seconds later, through her scope, she saw dirt kick up 2 feet left of the target. A miss, but it told her exactly what she needed to know about the wind. She adjusted and prepared for the second shot. The wind had shifted slightly, the flags near the target showing less movement. She waited for the pattern to stabilize, recognized the moment, and took the shot. For seconds of flight time, steel rang clear across the enormous distance. Hit! The third shot required even more patience. She watched the mirage, felt the temperature on her face, read the wind in the way the air itself seemed to move. When conditions aligned, she pressed the trigger. Hit! For the fourth shot, she noticed her barrel was barely warm to the touch despite 3 rounds fired. The white Cerakote finish was doing exactly what it was designed to do, managing heat that would be creating additional mirage on darker finished rifles. She made her wind call and took the shot. Hit! 3 hits, 1 miss, 1 shot remaining. The crowd had gone completely silent, recognizing they were watching something exceptional. Reina checked her time. 8 minutes remaining. She could take the shot now or wait for perfect conditions. She waited, watching the flags with the patience her father had drilled into her over thousands of practice sessions. The wind settled into a brief moment of consistency, a window that might last 5 seconds or might disappear instantly. She recognized it, adjusted, and pressed the trigger one final time. 2,500 meters away, after 4 seconds that felt like 4 hours, steel rang pure and true. 4 out of 5 at 2,500 meters. The crowd erupted. The applause washed over Reina as she cleared her rifle and stood from the firing line. 4 hits at 2,500 meters was exceptional shooting by any standard, and the crowd recognized it. She kept her expression neutral, professional, but inside she felt something break loose. Relief, maybe, or vindication, or simply the acknowledgement that she'd done what she came here to do. As she walked back to the competitors' area, she passed the remaining 4 shooters who still had to shoot. Henrik Strand caught her eye and nodded, a gesture of respect between competitors. The other 3 shooters watched her with expressions that ranged from admiration to calculation, each of them now knowing the standard they had to meet or exceed. She found a shaded area and began the process of documenting her performance. Group size measurements, wind calls, temperature readings, all the data that would go into her records. This was the part her father would have loved, the analysis that turned shooting into science. She imagined him reviewing her data book, nodding at her wind reads, pointing out where she could have been more patient or more aggressive. Kara Tirani appeared beside her with her ever-present camera and notebook. For hits at 2,500 meters, she said, that puts you in contention for the championship, depending on how the final shooters perform. We'll see, Reina said, still focused on her notes. Can I ask you something? Tirani sat down on the bench beside her, lowering her voice. When you took that last shot, you waited almost 3 minutes. You had plenty of time left, but you waited anyway. What were you waiting for? Reina looked up from her data book. The right condition. The wind was shifting every 30 seconds, creating patterns that would push a bullet off target. I needed a moment when everything aligned. When the flags told me the air between here and there was as consistent as it would get. And you can feel that, see that. My father taught me that shooting at extreme distance isn't about forcing shots. It's about recognizing moments. The rifle, the bullet, the atmosphere, they're all part of the system. You wait until the system allows for success. Tirani wrote quickly. There's something almost philosophical about that. It's just shooting, Reina said. But yes, my father approached it with that kind of mindset. He believed precision came from understanding, not from trying harder. The next shooter, a Swiss competitor named Mueller, approached the line. The crowd quieted to watch. Mueller was known for his aggressive shooting style, taking shots quickly and trusting his initial reads. He fired his 5-round string in under 7 minutes, managing 2 hits. Solid shooting, but not enough to challenge the leaders. The 13th shooter managed 1 hit. The 14th got 3 hits, but with a wide group size that hurt his scoring. That left 1 shooter remaining, a Canadian military sniper named Desmond Chun, who'd been quietly consistent throughout the entire competition. Chun had the pressure of shooting last, knowing exactly what he needed to do to win. He settled into position with deliberate calm, and Reina found herself watching with the same attention she'd given to studying wind patterns. Chun was exceptional. She'd recognized that from the first qualifier. If anyone could put together a perfect string under pressure, it was him. His first shot hit. The second hit. The third shot missed, catching a gust that appeared from nowhere. His fourth shot hit. Then, with 1 shot remaining and everything riding on it, Chun waited. He waited longer than anyone else had waited all day, letting time drain away while he searched for the perfect condition. When he finally took the shot, Reina knew from his body language that he'd called it right. For seconds later, steel rang. 4 hits out of 5, matching her performance. The championship would come down to group size measurement. The technical officials brought out laser measuring equipment and began the precise work of determining which shooter had put their hits closer together. The process took nearly 20 minutes, with officials conferring over measurements and triple-checking their data. Finally, the range master approached the microphone that had been set up for the award ceremony. "We have official results," he announced. The crowd pressed closer, everyone wanted to hear. He ran through the full results, starting from 15th place and working upward. Henrik Strand finished 8th, Respectable for someone who'd admitted his eyes weren't what they used to be. Campbell finished 6th, solid shooting, but not enough for the podium. Christoph took 5th. Del Vecchio finished 3rd, his cumulative scores throughout the competition earning him bronze despite only 3 hits in the final stage. That left 1st and 2nd. The range master paused for effect, letting tension build. 2nd place, with exceptional shooting throughout the competition and 4 hits in the championship stage, goes to Corporal Raina Kashani of the United States, shooting with a custom thermal management rifle of her own design. Applause erupted. Raina stood, accepting congratulations from nearby competitors, but her mind was already processing the implications. 2nd place meant she'd been edged out on group size measurement. Chen's hits had been tighter together than hers by whatever microscopic margin the officials had measured. In 1st place, the range master continued. Goes to Master Corporal Desmond Chun of Canada. Your champion. Chun accepted his victory with quiet dignity, shaking hands with officials and competitors. When he reached Raina, he held her hand a moment longer than the others. That was the best shooting I've seen at this distance, he said quietly. Your wind reading was flawless. You pushed me to shoot better than I thought I could. You earned it, Raina replied. Congratulations. The white rifle, Chun said. I've been watching it all week. Try to figure out if it was gimmick or genius. Now I know. He smiled. Next competition, I might be showing up with unusual equipment of my own. The awards ceremony proceeded with speeches and presentations. Raina accepted her 2nd-place trophy and prize, stood for photographs, and answered the same questions from journalists that she'd been answering all week. Yes, the white finish served a purpose. No, she hadn't designed it to make a statement. Yes, her father had been instrumental in developing the technology. No, she didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. Del Vecchio found her after the ceremony, his bronze medal hanging around his neck. Silver's nothing to dismiss, he said. You shot exceptionally well. Better than I did. You shot well too, Raina said. Bronze at an international championship is impressive. He glanced at the white rifle case beside her. I owe you an apology for how I acted at the beginning of this competition. I let my assumptions about your equipment color my judgment of your abilities. That was wrong. Apology accepted, Raina said. And thank you for saying it. Del Vecchio extended his hand one more time. Next year, I expect to see you back here defending your position. Maybe we'll both shoot a little better. Maybe, Raina agreed, shaking his hand. As the day wound down and competitors began packing their equipment for travel home, Raina sat alone in the now-quiet range area. She opened her data book and added final notes about the championship stage, documenting everything she'd learned about 2,500-meter shooting. Her father would never read these notes, would never ask her about her wind calls or her group size. But she wrote them anyway, maintaining the discipline he'd instilled, honoring the process he'd taught her. The white rifle rested in its case beside her, its distinctive finish catching the late afternoon sun. It had performed exactly as designed, managing heat and reducing mirage, and giving her every advantage that physics and engineering could provide. It hadn't won her the championship, but it had proven its worth to anyone willing to look past appearances and judge on performance. 2nd place in an international championship. 4 hits at 2,500 meters. Respect earned from competitors who'd started as critics. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Her father would have been proud. She was certain of that. The awards banquet that evening brought all competitors together in a hotel ballroom decorated with flags from the 43 participating nations. Raina sat at a table with Henrik Strand, the German shooter Christoph, and several other competitors who'd become friendly acquaintances over the week of shooting. The atmosphere was celebratory, the tension of competition replaced by camaraderie and shared respect. Halfway through dinner, the master of ceremonies approached the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, we have a special presentation this evening. As many of you know, this year's competition featured some remarkable equipment innovations. One in particular has generated significant interest from the shooting community and military observers alike. Raina felt eyes turning toward her table. BMC continued. Corporal Raina Kashani competed this week with a custom-designed rifle featuring thermal management technology developed by her late father. The white Cerakote finish that initially drew skepticism proved to be a significant technical advantage in managing barrel heat and reducing mirage at extreme distances. We've invited Corporal Kashani to say a few words about the development process and the science behind her equipment. Raina hadn't expected this. She glanced at Strand, who smiled encouragingly and gestured toward the podium. She stood, feeling the weight of attention as she walked to the front of the ballroom, with every eye tracking her movement. She took the microphone, her mind racing to organize 4 years of development work and her father's legacy into something coherent. "Thank you," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "The rifle you've all been talking about this week wasn't designed to make a statement or draw attention. It was designed to solve a specific problem that my father identified during his competitive shooting career." She paused, gathering her thoughts. At extreme distances, barrel heat creates mirage that distorts the sight picture. Traditional black rifle finishes absorb and retain heat, creating visible heat waves that rise from the barrel and interfere with accurate shooting, especially during rapid fire or sustained strings. My father was a physicist before he became a shooter, and he approached this problem scientifically. The room was silent now, competitors leaning forward to hear. He tested dozens of different finishes and coatings, documenting temperature differentials and measuring mirage patterns. White ceramic coating, specifically a custom formulation of Cerakote with embedded thermal dispersing particles, performed better than any other option. It reflects heat rather than absorbing it, keeps the barrel significantly cooler, and reduces mirage by 30 to 40% compared to standard black finishes. Raina looked out at the assembled shooters, seeing genuine interest in many faces. The white color wasn't a choice based on aesthetics. It was the result of months of testing and data collection. My father believed that innovation in shooting sports comes from questioning assumptions and being willing to look foolish in pursuit of better performance. He didn't care that the rifle looked unusual. He cared that it shot better. She felt emotion rising in her throat, but pushed through. He died 4 years ago, before he could see this rifle compete at this level. But everything I know about precision shooting, every technique and calculation and moment of patience, came from him. This week wasn't about proving the rifle works. It was about honoring his approach to the sport. Question everything. Test everything. Let data guide decisions, not tradition or appearance. Raina held up her silver medal. Second place in this competition represents years of work and development. It represents a scientific approach to equipment design. And it represents my father's belief that there's always a better way if you're willing to look for it. Thank you. The applause started slowly, then built to something thunderous. Competitors stood, a standing ovation that went beyond politeness into genuine respect. Raina returned to her table, her face flushed, surprised by the response. Strand leaned over as she sat. Your father would be very proud, not just of the shooting, but of how you honored his memory. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations with shooters who wanted to know more about the thermal technology, with military procurement officers interested in potential applications, with journalists documenting every detail. Del Vecchio approached with Chun, the champion, and the three of them spent an hour discussing technical specifications and sharing data about equipment performance. As the banquet wound down, Cara Tehrani pulled Raina aside. I want to write the full story, she said. Not just about the competition, but about your father, the development process, everything. This is bigger than just unusual equipment. It's about innovation and legacy and challenging assumptions. Raina considered. If you write it accurately. No dramatization, just the science and the shooting. That's all I want to write, Tehrani assured her. The truth is dramatic enough. Later, back in her quarters, Raina laid out the white rifle one final time before packing it for travel home. The finish showed where from a week of intensive use, carbon fouling around the muzzle, minor scratches from being placed in and out of the rifle case dozens of times. It looked used, functional like a tool that had done exactly what it was built to do. She ran her hand along the stock, feeling the texture of the ceramic coating. Her father had held this same rifle during testing, had fired it at the same targets, had documented its performance with the same meticulous attention to detail that she'd learned from him. The rifle was a connection across death, a physical manifestation of everything he'd taught her about precision and patience and the scientific method applied to shooting. Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from her mother, who'd been following the competition online. Your father would be so proud, not just of the medal, but of how you represented his work and his memory. Come home soon. We have much to celebrate. Raina typed a response, then deleted it and started over several times before settling on simple words. Coming home tomorrow. Can't wait to tell you everything. She finished packing, setting the rifle case beside her other luggage. Tomorrow would bring travel and return to normal life, and the beginning of whatever came next. But tonight, in this quiet room, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what the week had meant. She'd come to this competition carrying doubt from others and grief from herself. She was leaving with a silver medal, with respect earned through performance, and with the certainty that her father's legacy lived on not just in her memories, but in the rifle that bore his innovations and the shooting technique that came from his teaching. The white rifle had spoken its truth across distances that defied belief. It had wrung steel at 2,500 meters. It had managed heat and reduced mirage and performed exactly as designed. More than that, it had forced people to question their assumptions about what worked and what didn't, about tradition versus innovation, about judging based on appearance versus performance. Second place wasn't first, but it was enough. It was more than enough. Her father had taught her that success wasn't about beating everyone else. It was about shooting the best you possibly could, about honoring the process, about being willing to stand alone, if necessary, in pursuit of what worked. She'd done that. She'd stood alone with a rifle that looked wrong to everyone who saw it, and she'd shot well enough to earn respect from the best shooters in the world. That was the victory that mattered. Not the medal, not the placement, but the journey from doubt to respect, from criticism to acknowledgement. Raina turned off the lights and settled into bed, exhausted but satisfied. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new questions about where to go from here. But tonight, she slept with the peace of knowing she'd honored her father's memory in the way that mattered most. She'd shot well, she'd represented his innovations with integrity, and she'd proven that sometimes the things that look wrong are actually exactly right. The morning after the banquet brought an unexpected development. Raina was finishing breakfast in the hotel restaurant when a competition director approached her table. Corporal Cassiany, he said, his expression suggesting this was more than a social visit. We have a situation, an opportunity. Actually, would you mind coming with me? She followed him to a conference room where several officials waited, along with Desmond Chun and two people she didn't recognize. One was a woman in her 60s wearing a military uniform with general stars. The other was a man in civilian clothes carrying a briefcase. The general stood and extended her hand. General Patricia Drummond, United States Army. I oversee advanced weapons development and testing. I've been following your performance this week with great interest. Raina shook her hand, confused about why a general would be at a shooting competition. Mom, General Drummond gestured to the chairs. Please sit. Let me explain why we're here. Your father's thermal management technology has caught the attention of several military research programs. The applications go beyond competitive shooting. We're interested in understanding whether this technology could be adapted for military sniper rifles, particularly for extended operations in desert and high-heat environments. The civilian spoke up. I'm Dr. Marcus Hightower from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. We've reviewed the data from your equipment inspection and your performance metrics throughout the competition. The temperature differentials your rifle maintained compared to standard equipment were significant. We'd like to conduct formal testing. Raina processed this carefully. My father developed this technology for competitive use. He never considered military applications. But the principles are the same, General Drummond said. Military snipers face the same challenges with barrel heat and mirage, often under even more demanding conditions. If we could reduce heat signature and improve accuracy at extreme distances, it could save lives. Your father's innovation could have impact far beyond the shooting sports. Chun, who'd been silent until now, leaned forward. They approached me as well. My equipment is more traditional, but my performance data complements yours. They want to understand what combination of technology and technique produces optimal results at extreme distances. Reyna looked at the general. What exactly are you proposing? A research partnership, Drummond replied. We'd like access to your father's development data, permission to test the thermal coating technology, and your input as a subject matter expert. In return, we'd provide funding for further research and development, proper attribution to your father's innovations, and compensation for your time and expertise. Dr. Hightower opened his briefcase and produced a folder. We've drafted a preliminary agreement. Obviously, you'd want legal counsel to review it, but the basic framework is straightforward. Your father's intellectual property remains protected, you maintain control over commercial applications, and the military gains license to test and potentially implement the technology for national defense purposes. Reyna thought about her father in his workshop, testing finish after finish, documenting every temperature reading and mirage pattern. He'd approached it as pure research, chasing optimal performance without thought to applications beyond competition. But he'd also been a patriot, a man who'd served his country and believed in protecting those who served after him. Can I review this and get back to you? Reyna asked. Of course, General Drummond said. Take whatever time you need. We're not trying to rush you into anything. But I will say this, your father was onto something significant. The data doesn't lie. His approach to thermal management represents a genuine innovation in rifle technology. It would be a shame to limit that innovation to competitive shooting when it could serve a larger purpose. The meeting concluded with Reyna accepting the folder and promising to consult with legal counsel and her family. As she left the conference room, Chin walked alongside her. Heavy stuff, he said. Not what you expected when you came here to shoot. Not even close, Reyna agreed. For what it's worth, Chun continued, I think your father would be honored that his work caught military attention. Innovation that improves performance and saves lives, that's legacy material. They reached the hotel lobby where other competitors were checking out and preparing for travel home. Reyna saw Delvecchio and Henrik Strand loading equipment, saw Campbell talking with other American shooters, saw the competition disbanding as people returned to their regular lives. Cara Tirani appeared with her camera. I heard about the military meeting, she said without preamble. Are you going to pursue it? I don't know yet, Reyna said honestly. It's a lot to process. Can I offer some perspective? Tirani pulled out her notebook. I've been covering shooting sports for 15 years. I've seen hundreds of equipment innovations come and go. Most of them are marginal improvements or marketing gimmicks. What your father developed was different. It's based on solid physics and proven through real performance data. If the military can adapt it, and it helps even one sniper make a critical shot, that's meaningful impact. Reyna nodded slowly. I need to talk to my mother. This was my father's work as much as mine. She should have input on what happens with his legacy. Smart, Tirani said. And when you make a decision, whatever it is, I'd like to write about it. The story of how a competitive shooting innovation became military technology, that's the kind of thing people need to read. The flight home gave Reyna hours to think, to review the military's proposal, to consider what her father would have wanted. She remembered him talking about the practical applications of his research, about how thermal management mattered in any context where precision shooting was critical. He'd never pursued military contracts because he loved the purity of competitive shooting, the sport for its own sake. But he'd also never dismissed the idea that his work could serve broader purposes. Her mother picked her up at the airport, embracing her for a long moment before pulling back to look at the silver medal hanging around Reyna's neck. Your father would have been so proud, she said, her eyes wet. Show me everything. Tell me every detail. Over dinner at home, Reyna recounted the entire competition. The initial mockery, the equipment inspection, the gradual earning of respect through performance, the final championship stage, and the narrow loss to Chun. Her mother listened with the attention of someone who understood the technical details, who'd lived through the development process alongside her husband. When Raina explained about the military's interest, her mother was quiet for a long time. "Your father always said his work was about pushing boundaries," she said finally, "about finding better ways to do things that matter. If his thermal technology can help military snipers perform better, stay safer, make critical shots when lives depend on it, I think he'd want that. But only if we do it right. Only if his contributions are properly recognized and his integrity maintained." "That's what I was thinking too," Raina said. "Then let's review their proposal together," her mother replied. "Let's make sure it honors your father's work and serves the purposes he would have approved. And then we'll decide." They spent the evening going through the military's documents, discussing terms and implications, considering what protection of her father's intellectual property would require. It was technical work, legal and scientific in equal measure, exactly the kind of careful analysis her father would have demanded. By midnight, they'd made preliminary notes about what they'd accept and what they'd require changes to. The framework was sound, but details needed refinement. Proper attribution would be non-negotiable. Commercial rights would remain with the family. Military applications would be licensed, not sold outright. As Raina prepared for bed, exhausted from travel and emotion, her mother stopped her at the stairs. "Your father will be proud of how you shot this week," she said, "but he'd be even more proud of how you're handling what comes after. You're protecting his legacy while allowing it to grow. That's exactly what he would have wanted." Raina hugged her mother, feeling the weight of responsibility and opportunity in equal measure. The white rifle rested in its case in her room, waiting for the next competition, the next challenge, the next opportunity to prove that innovation mattered more than tradition. 3 months after the international competition, Raina stood at a military testing facility watching technicians examine 5 rifles that bore the white Cerakote finish her father had developed. The partnership with the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency had moved forward after weeks of negotiation and legal review, resulting in a formal research program that would test the thermal management technology under real-world military conditions. General Drummond approached her observation position. "The initial results are exceeding our expectations," she said. "Temperature differentials are consistent with your competition data. Mirage reduction is measurable and significant. We're seeing accuracy improvements at distances beyond 2,000 meters, particularly in sustained fire scenarios." Raina watched through the glass as a military sniper fired a test string with one of the white-finished rifles. "My father would be amazed to see this." "Your father was a genius," Drummond said simply. He identified a problem that the entire military-industrial complex had accepted as unsolvable, and he solved it in his garage workshop. That's the kind of innovation we need more of. The testing continued for another hour, with Raina providing input on optimal coating thickness and application techniques. The military snipers testing the rifles were initially skeptical about the unusual appearance, but their attitudes changed after seeing the performance data. One sergeant approached her after his test session, his expression a mix of surprise and respect. "I've been a sniper for 12 years, he said. "I've fired every rifle system the military uses. This thermal coating makes a measurable difference. On my 4th and 5th shots, when my barrel would normally be creating significant mirage, I'm getting clear sight pictures. At extreme distance, that's the difference between hit and miss." "That's what my father believed," Raina replied. "That small advantages compound into significant improvements." The military wasn't the only organization interested in the technology. Several competitive shooting equipment manufacturers had approached her about licensing agreements. A prominent rifle builder wanted to offer white thermal coating as a custom option. An ammunition company was exploring whether similar thermal principles could be applied to bullet design itself. The story had spread beyond shooting sports. Kara Tehrani's article in Precision Rifle magazine had been picked up on mainstream media, generating interest in the intersection of competitive sports and military technology. Raina had done interviews with publications ranging from shooting journals to science magazines, explaining the physics behind her father's innovation. 6 months after the competition, Reina received an invitation to speak at the International Sniper Symposium, a gathering of military and law enforcement precision shooters from around the world. She stood before an audience of hundreds, the white rifle displayed on a table beside the podium, and explained the development process that had started in her father's workshop 4 years earlier. Innovation in shooting sports often comes from unexpected places, she told the assembled shooters. My father wasn't trying to revolutionize military technology. He was trying to shoot better in competitions. But he approached the problem scientifically, questioning assumptions that everyone else accepted as truth. The result was something that works not just for sport, but for any application where precision shooting matters. After her presentation, she was approached by shooters from a dozen different countries, all asking technical questions about coating application and thermal properties. Delvecchio was there, having been invited to speak about wind reading techniques. He greeted her warmly, the antagonism of their first meeting completely gone. Your father's technology is changing the sport, he said. I'm seeing more shooters experimenting with thermal management coatings. Some are copying the white finish exactly. Others are exploring variations. But they're all following the path he started. That's what innovation does, Reina replied. It opens doors for others to walk through. The following competition season, Reina returned to international shooting with a white rifle, now joined by several other competitors who'd adopted thermal management finishes of various colors. The technology was no longer unusual or controversial. It was simply accepted as an effective approach to managing barrel heat at extreme distances. She finished third in the next international championship, beaten by Chin again and by a Norwegian shooter who developed his own thermal coating based on her father's published specifications. The loss didn't sting the way she'd expected. Instead, it felt like validation. Her father's innovation had spread, improved the sport, and lifted the performance level of everyone who adopted it. A year after the original competition, Reina visited her father's grave with her mother. They brought the white rifle, now showing were from thousands of rounds fired in competition and demonstrations. The finish was scratched and carbon-fouled, marked by use and achievement. He would have loved seeing where this went, her mother said quietly. The military adoption, the commercial interest, the way it changed competitive shooting. He always said innovation was meant to be shared, not hoarded. Reina traced her fingers along the rifle stock. I used to think this was about proving something. Proving the rifle worked, proving I could shoot, proving that people who doubted me were wrong. But it was never about that. What was it about? Her mother asked. Honoring his process, Reina said. His belief that there's always a better way if you're willing to look for it. His willingness to appear foolish in pursuit of actual improvement. His understanding that innovation requires both science and courage. They stood together in silence, the white rifle between them, a physical connection to the man who'd built it and the principles he'd taught. Legacy wasn't about medals or recognition, Reina understood now. It was about whether your work opened doors for others, whether your innovations served purposes beyond yourself, whether you left the sport better than you found it. Her father had done all of that. The white rifle was just the visible manifestation of something deeper, a way of thinking about problems, an approach to innovation that valued data over tradition, performance over appearance, science over assumptions. Reina had carried that approach into international competition and watched it change attitudes. She'd partnered with military researchers and seen it potentially save lives. She'd share the technology freely and watch the entire sport improve. That was the legacy that mattered. If you enjoyed this story and connected with Reina's journey from doubt to respect, drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment or character. Maybe you've been in a situation where you had to prove yourself against skeptics, or maybe you've witnessed someone succeed by doing things differently. We'd love to hear your story and what resonated most with you. 2 years after the competition that changed everything, Reina stood at a shooting range with a group of young competitive shooters, teaching them the fundamentals her father had taught her. Wind reading, patience, the scientific method applied to shooting. Several of them had rifles with thermal management coatings, the technology now common enough to be unremarkable. One young woman, maybe 17, approached after the session with a rifle case. She opened it to reveal a rifle with bright blue thermal coating, distinctive and unusual. "Everyone told me the color was impractical," the girl said, "but I tested it and the data shows it works. So I'm using it." Raina smiled, recognizing herself in the girl's defiant confidence. "What matters is whether it helps you shoot better." "It does," the girl said. "I tested 5 different colors, and blue performed best for my specific conditions. I documented everything." "Good," Raina replied. "That's exactly the right approach. Test everything. Document everything. Let data guide your decisions, not what other people think looks right." The girl hesitated, then asked quietly, "Do you think I'll face the same criticism you did? People saying I'm just trying to get attention?" "Probably," Raina said honestly. "Innovation always faces resistance. People who are comfortable with tradition feel threatened by change. But if your rifle works, if your shooting backs up your choices, eventually they'll have to accept the results. Just focus on your process and let your performance speak for itself." The girl nodded, closed her rifle case, and walked away with the kind of determination that Raina recognized from looking in mirrors. Another shooter questioning assumptions, testing alternatives, willing to look foolish in pursuit of better performance. Her father's legacy spreading through another generation. Raina packed up her own rifle, the white finish now familiar to everyone in competitive shooting, no longer unusual or controversial, but simply accepted as one valid approach among many. The journey from mockery to respect had been difficult, but it had proven something important. That innovation required courage as much as science. That being different demanded both data and determination. That legacy lived not in trophies or recognition, but in opening doors for those who came after. The white rifle had spoken its truth across impossible distances, ringing steel and changing minds. But more importantly, it had started conversations about what was possible when someone was willing to question everything and test alternatives. That conversation continued, spreading through the shooting community, inspiring the next generation of innovators who would carry the process forward. Her father would have loved that most of all, not the medals or the military contracts or the recognition, but the knowledge that his approach to solving problems had taken root and grown beyond him. That his legacy was alive in every shooter who questioned tradition, tested alternatives, and valued performance over appearance. Raina shouldered the white rifle case and headed home, already thinking about the next competition, the next challenge, the next opportunity to honor her father's memory through the only method that truly mattered. Shooting well, innovating boldly, and proving that sometimes the things that look wrong are actually exactly right.